guys, welcome back to part 5 of our Lioness tutorial. As I said in the last part, we're going to start our journey onto these ears, and they require a little bit of a different technique. We're going to be using our embossing tool. We might need the help of our gel pen. I've got my Prismacolor white Lightfast pencil. I have been trying it out and it is opaque, but maybe not quite as opaque as the Derwent Chinese white or the Pablo white. I'm going to give it a go, going to see how it goes with all of these other pencils. So first things first, I think what we need to do is just generally get a base layer over this part of the ear over here. So as usual, we're going to erase our graphite line. So we're going to just get rid of all of this up to here. I probably won't get the whole of the ear done, but I want to show the technique used when doing all of this straggly, like coarse looking ear hair fur. So what we do is we take our buff titanium and just as usual we add our base layer and we go in the direction that the fur is going. So as we progress up to the ears, it starts to fold over on itself. So for that, I'm just going in the opposite direction to the fur here. So this fur was going up like this. So with this, I'm just going the opposite direction. So instead of coming up, I'm going across. And that will just help it look as if it's overlapping itself slightly. So we're going a little bit further down. And we are going up to this line here. There are some really fine white hairs just here. I'm just going to add the base layer up to there. So we're going to add this buff titanium all over. We're going to go all up here, making sure I'm checking the direction of all of this fur as well. I don't want to get any of it wrong because it will make it look less realistic, and we're aiming for realism here. So as we get to the outer edge of the ear, I'm just going to make a few lines coming off. That's just to make it and help it look fluffy, because it doesn't just stop at that line. You get a few hairs which go over. You get a few hairs that are extremely longer than the rest. So I'm just adding all of that in. And make sure we dust this off because it gets fairly dusty and I don't want any weird horrible patches of pencil dust. So just coming back down and just adding the base layer down to here. So all of this fur direction is what makes this look complicated, but if you don't think of it as fur, it's not as complicated. If you just look at all the shapes in there, then it's a lot easier. So I may as well just go all the way along here. There is a very faint dark line around the outside, so that's going to hide that graphite line for us. As we start to get to this pencil line where all of the hairs start to get really straggly, what I'm going to do is start to be a bit sporadic with my pencil. So instead of just going all in the same direction, I am making little fur marks, basically, going all over the place, and that's just going to help later on. So the base layer is really the basis of all the other lines, so if we put the base layer down properly, it's going to be a lot easier with our subsequent layers. So we've got a nice even base coat there, and we've gone all the way to this graphite line, pretty much. Now with that, I'm going to erase it, because we're going to use the embossing tool to create the really fine white lines, like whiskers almost they are. So I got rid of all the graphite. I'm going to take our smallest tip of the embossing tool, the 0.8mm, and then we're going to look at our reference and we're just going to make wiggly lines all over. Really want to make them uniform, they're going all over the place. And then there's some down here as well where they curl over, so we're adding those in, just stroking the paper. You can see where I've pushed quite hard here, it's really indented. Add a few really squiggly ones, and then we can bring some which overlap into the ear itself. They'll be the same colour as our base layer, so they won't be quite as bright, which is exactly what we want. So we're just adding these just like that. A few more down here. Just going to get rid of this graphite line as well and add them there whilst I've got the embossing tool out. I may as well add them all at the same time. So add all of these. These ones down on this section here are a little less sporadic, so they're not going to be quite as weird and wild and wiry. Just going to go all in one direction. And we're just going to add a few lines up here. Just keep adding them until I'm happy with how it's going to look. And I think we're there. So that's going to help us out a bunch when it comes to shading and everything. So speaking of shading, let's get onto that part. Directly underneath the ear, just here, where I've added a few embossing lines, there is a dark section. So we're going to add that in. So I'm doing a base layer, or a second layer of the burnt ochre. Is it burnt ochre? Yeah, burnt ochre 10%, followed by brown ochre 10%. And then on top of that, we're going to add some polychromos Bista. So we're going to add that on there. Following the direction of the hair, remember, keep it all nice and even. Keep it blended in with the other parts. And then to really darken that up, we can add some nougat. So we'll add a little layer of that. Blend it into the rest just by doing a nice shading all over there. And there's a little bit of like reddy brown, so I'm going to add some of the Perulian brown here. Just a tiny amount. And then where is that? Then you're going to add some walnut brown. Just a tiny bit of this, just in the darkest areas. And then to finish off, we're going to add some burnt sienna. Add that right under there. And then we can add a few fur lines as well. just like that. So we've got that dark section underneath the ear now. So what we're going to do is start to tone up the rest of the ear. So we're going to take our first two colours, the burnt ochre 10% and this one, which is the brown ochre 10%. I'm just going to shade those. As we did for here, if there's any really light patches, and I've got one here and one just here, we're going to keep those void of these colours. So we're going to go around them. So we're looking at this in terms of shapes. Trying to mimic the shapes with our pencil. Rather than think of it as a clump of hair, just going to think of it as shapes with some jaggedy edges. And those jaggedy edges we're going to add in. And those jaggedy edges being the tips of the fur from this part. So add all of those in, go all the way up to our embossed lines there. Just adding in this all over. All up here as well, just add in a nice layer all over those embossed lines in the darkest patches. There's no more really light parts apart from this little tuft coming out, so we're going to add again all of the colour around that. You can see here the light patch, and then we're starting to form all of the hair around there. So we're going to go all the way up with this colour, all the way up here. So we're keeping our base layers nice and soft, and like we were with the face fur, it's when we start to add the darker colours that will start to add a little bit of texture. But for now, just adding in all of this. Just like that. So now we can add our second layer of the brown ochre 10%. We're going to add this all over those areas where we just added the burnt ochre, leaving the lightest bits free. This will just help define them a little bit more. You can see it there. All the way up here with this. Like that. So now we've got a nice coating. It was a bit quiet there, I was just concentrating a little bit. So now we can move on to our darker colours. So we're going to pick up the brown ochre 50%. And then again, we're going to concentrate this in the darkest areas, making sure we sort of avoid those lighter areas with this. We can add a few layers of this to really darken everything up where needs be. So I'm actually going to pair this with another colour at the same time. I'm going to pair this with the burnt ochre of the polychromos. So where there's some really dark patches, I'm going to go over with this. So again, we're thinking of all of this in terms of shapes. We're not thinking of it in terms of hair. Always in terms of lovely, lovely shapes. So as we get towards our darker colours as well, especially around these lighter areas, we can start to add fur lines because there's a lot of lighter colours showing through. So we don't want to add a whole layer of these darker colours. So we're going to add fur lines with all of our subsequent layers. We can shade in certain parts where we know that it's definitely a lot darker, but when we come to these lighter patches where you've got a lot of the lighter layers showing through, we're just going to do it in fur lines, because then it's going to create the coarseness, it's going to make it look wiry like our ear hair is. So instead of shading, we're going to add fur lines. I'm adding the shading though where the patches are darker, so as we come towards the inner ear, it's a lot darker and there's a lot more of a darker hue showing through. So this bit can all be shaded because it's towards the middle of the ear, and then as we get towards the outer ear, we're just going to transform those shaded bits into fur lines. I think what might be helpful is if I sharpen my pencil ever so slightly. Once I've done a majority of these, I'm going to sharpen up my pencil and just add some really bold lines of this colour. Now you can see on the outer edge of my ear there is a darker hue and there's not that many coarse lines, so on the outer edge, especially along the top here, we're going to treat it like this fur in here, but where we've got the straggly lines of the inner ear, we're going to treat it as coarse, wiry fur, so that's where we're going to add our fur lines. I know I keep repeating myself, but just repeating myself so that you all know what we're doing. So I'm going to make these fur lines a lot longer than what were in the face as well. That's because there's a lot of long fur hidden inside of this ear. Also, this light patch, as we get darker, it's going to need darkening itself, but we're just leaving it light for now. So this can be shaded up a little bit and blended in, and then the fur lines can be added. So that's where we need a semi-sharp pencil, so I'm just going to sharpen it up just a little bit. And then we can add some really fine fur lines with this, like this. The more fur lines we add in the same place, the darker it's going to become, so that's great too. It's going to do our job and darken it for us, as well as make it look nice and coarse. You can already see the difference in this texture compared to this texture, and that's what we're aiming for. Even if it doesn't look exactly like your reference, as long as you've got the textures right, that's the main thing, is the textures. Okay, so we're ready to move on to our next colour, and I'm going to use the burnt ochre, like I said before. I'm just going to shade in some darker patches with this. So, as we come towards the inner ear here, adding this colour. It's not darkening it a hell of a lot, but it's darkening it enough that I can see where we need to add those darker colours and tones. And then with this, I've got a sharp edge on this because I broke the tip, and I don't really want to sharpen it if it's got a bit of a sharp point. Just going to add some fur lines. This is where we're going to start to add fur lines in this lighter bit as well, to blend it all in. You can push fairly hard as well, not super hard so that you wreck your paper, but hard enough that it creates a nice line and tone. So along the top here we're going to start doing some of this shading with this colour. And as we come down we can start to create some fur lines. Shade this bit in here because that bit's not quite as light as that. Then we're ready to move on to our next colour. So the next colour will be some apricot to add some vibrancy. So we're going to add some fur lines in this colour. Again, concentrating in those dark areas with the shading, and then coming out and adding all of those fur lines. You can really start to see the difference in the tones as well as the texture forming there. So on the outer edge we're going to add some shading of this, not adding too much of this colour, but enough that gives it a nice subtle apricot glow. So added that. Then the next colour, which will be our darker oranges now, so we're going to go with the terracotta polychromos and the burnt ochre luminance. We're going to start with the burnt ochre luminance. Again, we're going to shade in the darker areas. We will go over the darker areas with some nougat and some burnt sienna. All of those fun colours, but for now we're just adding in the oranges. So shading the darker parts, really shading those up, adding in some fur lines as well. So all around the inner ear gets nice and dark. Nice vibrant orange, and then as we come out we can add these fur lines. Trying not to press too hard with this dark orange because otherwise it will darken everything up, and that's not what we want. We want to avoid that. And with this I'm going to add some smaller fur lines around the outside of the ear now. And add some really curly lines in there. Really curly ones. Next colour is the terracotta. I'm not sure that this is going to do very much, but we'll give it a go. No, it's going to be the same colour, so I'm going to skip the terracotta, and we're going to go straight in with our nougat, the walnut brown, some cerulean brown and some burnt sienna. So I'm going to start with a little bit of nougat just to dull down some of the orange areas. Start to darken this up as well. And with this, you can start to add those dark lines, like what we added over the face here, so we can start to add those in. And if you see any shapes forming where there's some dark patterns, add those in. Don't necessarily add it all in fur lines, you can add it in shapes as well. The nougat doesn't really do anything to darken any areas. It's purely just to dull down the orange a smidgen. So with our burnt sienna next, we can start to really darken these bits in here. So we're going to shade over these bits towards the inner ear, and you can see all of those embossed lines starting to pop up now. Go in a little further in there. What I find is sometimes best to do is shade directly around those white hairs, and it just makes them stand out just a little bit more. Just shade around them, in between them. Now you can start to see some shapes appearing where you've got some dark clusters. So think of it as shapes, not as the fur. Just adding fur lines where you feel necessary. Again, it doesn't have to match your reference photo. Just darken up the outer edge of the ear. Now we're going to take our Cerulean brown. I'm going to add some fur lines of this. It's a nice red colour and will really help darken up those dark patches. Got a few areas here where you need the lines outlined. Get right in the inner ear there with this colour too, and drag some of these fur lines using a very, very light hand with this colour. Create some fur lines all out here. Go in different directions as well. Go all over the place. Now switching to our walnut brown. And where it's darkest is where we're going to concentrate this colour. So really focus on the base of these white hairs. So right in there, right in all the gaps. Around all of this, we can just add this as a nice layer here, as a line it between some of those as well. Start to add some fur lines into this lighter patch, and then obviously come all the way up here. So we need to shade this light patch a little bit, so I'm going to add some of the brown ochre 50% just to tone it down a smidge. We can add some pink in a few places on this ear just by shading. We've done most of the hairlines now. You've got the texture. It's looking good. So we need to start to shade some orange colours back in just to bring the vibrancy back up. So I'm going to use some of this anthracanoid pink just around the edges of the ears because it's got like a pinky hue, and also some of this burnt sienna 10%. Around the edges, and then with some bright oranges, so I'm going to use the luminance orange and the luminance yellow ochre. I'm just going to shade some of these over because it's not really a muted colour on the edges here. It's really, really bright. So going in with the yellow ochre, just a nice shade in, and then with the orange, shading that over as well. You can see how vibrant that makes it. Going all the way up here. Just a light shading, you don't even need to push hard with this. And then we can blend it in with this. light patch. So we can take our brown ochre 50% and shade that all in again. So you can totally see the texture difference there. You can see the fur changes by where we've shaded by looking at it as shapes and not necessarily just fur. You can always go in and add more fur lines, so you can go in with the walnut brown, you can just add fur lines all over the place. Once you get the rest of the ear in, it will start to look a lot lighter on this side here. What you can do as well, if you need more white lines in there, you can go in with a white pencil or a white gel pen and add more hairs over the top. I'm just going to try this Prismacolor pencil just to see how it fares with adding white over the top. It's very soft, so it doesn't really, it's not that opaque. So what I would do is I would take a white gel pen, any bits that need white added to them, just add some white gel pen over the top. If you need to tone it down afterwards, you can shade over the top, just make sure you don't remove the gel pen. So just have a little play around, add some lines in. What you can also do is take a scalpel and scrape away some of the colour, or you can use a tiny eraser, or just a white pencil is best, or a gel pen. So that's it for this part. With the next part we're going to finish the ear, get it all in there. The hard part's done, and that's creating the texture. As I said before, as long as your texture in the ear is different to what is on the face, so it looks a lot more straggly, it doesn't matter if you get it 100%. As long as you've got the difference in those two textures, you'll be absolutely fine and dandy for creating your lioness like this. But if you follow the steps that I've said, add the embossing tool, just follow it in the terms of shapes and not necessarily hairs, you'll be good to go. I will see you in the next part, guys. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you later. Bye!